somewhere. Right now, a baby is having an experience it will never remember. Not because the experience wasn't important, because the machinery to keep it doesn't exist yet. You were once that baby. And whatever happened to you in those first years, whoever held you, whatever room you slept in, whatever face was the very first one you ever learned to recognize, all of it is gone. Not hidden, not buried. Gone. But the real answer is far stranger than simple forgetting. Your brain didn't lose those memories. It never built the shelves to store them on in the first place. Scientists call this infantile amnesia, and for most of the 20th century, nobody could agree on why it happened. Sigmund Freud was one of the first to name the phenomenon, and he assumed the missing years were repressed, buried somewhere deep and dark, hidden away because they were too disturbing to keep in plain view. It's a compelling story. It's also almost certainly wrong. The real explanation didn't come from a therapist's couch. It came from watching babies kick. A psychologist named Carolyn Rovi Collier ran a now famous series of experiments using something almost absurdly simple. A mobile hung above a crib, connected by a ribbon to a baby's ankle. Kick the ankle, and the mobile moves. Babies as young as 2 or 3 months old figured this out almost instantly, kicking away, delighted by their own power to control something in the world around them. Then, Rovi Collier waited. Days, weeks. She'd bring the same baby back, hang the same mobile, and just watch. And astonishingly, the babies remembered. They kicked immediately, expecting the mobile to move, sometimes weeks after the original session. So, infants can form memories. Real ones, detailed enough to guide behavior weeks later, which means something else is going on. It's not that babies fail to learn, it's that almost none of what they learn survives into adulthood in a form you can consciously access. This is where a psychologist named Patricia Bauer picked up the thread, spending decades studying exactly what kind of memories young children can form and what happens to them over time. Her research showed something crucial. Very young children can absolutely remember events, sometimes for months, sometimes over a year. But there's a catch. The memory has to be retrieved and used relatively soon, or it tends to fade permanently, faster and more completely than an older child's or an adult's memory would. Bauer's work suggested infantile amnesia isn't a single, sudden wall you hit. It's a slow erosion, memories forming and then dissolving before the physical structure needed to preserve them long-term is fully built. That structure is a small, curved region deep in your brain called the hippocampus. And it's central to converting short-term experience into long-term, retrievable memory. Here's the strange part. Your hippocampus in infancy isn't idle. It's under construction, and construction sites are terrible places to store anything permanently. A neuroscientist named Paul Frankland took this idea into the lab using an unexpected angle. Neurogenesis, the process by which brand new neurons are constantly born inside the hippocampus. In adults, this happens at a relatively slow, steady rate. In infants, it's happening at a blistering pace, new neurons flooding in constantly as the brain builds its long-term memory architecture from scratch. Franklin's research pointed to something almost paradoxical. All those new neurons, essential for eventually building a functioning memory system, might actually be actively disrupting the memories being formed during that same period. Imagine constantly renovating a filing cabinet while also trying to file important documents into it. The new neurons wire themselves into existing circuits, rearranging connections that older memories were relying on to stay intact. The very process that builds your long-term memory system for the rest of your life might be the same process erasing almost everything that happened while it was under construction. This reframes what infantile amnesia actually is. Not a failure, not repression, a byproduct of your brain performing one of the most intensive construction projects it will ever undertake at the exact moment you were least equipped to protect anything being built alongside it. There's another piece to this puzzle. And it's not just biological, it's linguistic. Memory, especially the kind you can consciously narrate to another person, tends to attach itself to language. A memory becomes durable, retrievable, tellable, partly because you can eventually put it into words. This happened, then that happened, and it made me feel a certain way. Before you had language, your experiences existed as something closer to raw sensation, warmth, sound, motion, feeling, all real, all encoded somewhere in that developing brain, but without the narrative scaffolding that lets an adult mind pull a memory back out on command. By the time you developed enough language to tell yourself a story about your own life, the earliest chapters had already dissolved. Victims of a hippocampus still under construction and a mind that hadn't yet learned how to file experience into something callable years later. None of this means those years didn't matter. This is the part that should genuinely change how you think about early childhood, your own or anyone else's. Developmental researchers have found that even though you can't consciously recall your first 2 or 3 years, they still shaped you. Attachment patterns formed in infancy. The sense of whether the world responds when you cry out, whether comfort reliably arrives, whether your needs matter. These get encoded not as retrievable stories, but as something more like a felt baseline, a background hum that colors how safe or unsafe the world feels for the rest of your life. You don't remember the thousand small moments that built that baseline, but your nervous system does in its own wordless way. So, somewhere in your own past sits a version of you that laughed at something you'll never recall, that felt afraid of something you'll never be able to name, that fell asleep against someone whose face you can no longer picture from that specific moment. That version of you existed completely, felt everything fully, and simply lived in a brain not yet built to keep the record. You were there, you just weren't built yet to remember being there. And somewhere, right now, a baby is having an experience it will never remember, laughing at something that will vanish completely by the time it's old enough to ask what happened. But it happened, and in some quiet, wordless way, it's already becoming part of who they'll turn out to be.